In the shadow of a previous global conflict, the seeds of another were sown. Central to this emerging ideology was Adolf Hitler's autobiographical manifesto, Mein Kampf, published in 2 volumes in 1925 and 1926. This text, translated as My Struggle, laid out a chilling blueprint for Germany's future. Within its pages, Hitler articulated his political ideology and future plans for the nation, including his aspirations for territorial expansion and his deeply rooted anti-Semitic views, which would tragically come to define a generation. Historians widely cite Mein Kampf as a foundational document for understanding the Third Reich's destructive ambitions. A core tenet of Hitler's ideology, prominently featured in Mein Kampf, was the concept of Lebensraum, or living space. This geopolitical theory posited that Germany needed to expand eastward into Eastern Europe to acquire additional territory and resources for its population, particularly agricultural land. Such expansion was explicitly intended to support the racial supremacy of the Aryan race and to displace, enslave, or exterminate the existing Slavic populations whom Hitler deemed inferior. This doctrine provided a potent justification for aggression, directly contributing to the eventual invasion of countries like Poland and the Soviet Union. Beyond territorial ambitions, Hitler's rhetoric and detailed plans consistently underscored a systematic intention to eradicate Jewish people from Europe. Historical records and speeches from the early Nazi period reveal a progression from discrimination to persecution, culminating in the horrific concept of the final solution. Scholars specializing in the Holocaust emphasize that these plans were not a spontaneous reaction but a calculated, ideological cornerstone of the Nazi regime, present in Hitler's thinking decades before the war. This insidious agenda would later manifest in the most tragic events of the 20th century, leading to unprecedented state-sponsored genocide. Hitler's racial hierarchy not only targeted Jewish people but also designated Slavic peoples, including Poles, Russians, and Ukrainians, as untermenschen or subhumans. This dehumanizing classification was integral to the Lebensraum policy. According to Nazi ideology, these populations were considered fit only for slave labor or extermination, clearing the way for German settlement and resource exploitation. The implementation of this worldview on the Eastern Front resulted in immense suffering and death, not only among combatants but also among millions of civilians. Historians confirm that this racial prejudice fueled the brutality of the Eastern Campaign. The first significant territorial expansion of Nazi Germany occurred in March 1938 with the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. This move defied the Treaty of Versailles, which explicitly prohibited such a union. However, under pressure from Nazi Germany and with considerable internal Austrian support from Nazi sympathizers, the Austrian government was compelled to acquiesce. German troops marched into Austria largely unopposed, marking a pivotal moment in Hitler's aggressive foreign policy and illustrating the international community's reluctance to confront his actions forcefully. This event demonstrated Hitler's willingness to violate international agreements. Following the Anschluss, Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia, specifically the Sudetenland region, which had a significant ethnic German population. Citing the principle of self-determination, Hitler demanded its annexation. In September 1938, the Munich Agreement was signed by Germany, France, Britain, and Italy, ceding the Sudetenland to Germany in an act of appeasement. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously declared peace for our time. However, this concession proved futile, as Germany violated the agreement just 6 months later, in March 1939, by occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia. This act confirmed Hitler's insatiable territorial ambitions. As tensions escalated across Europe, a surprising diplomatic move occurred in August 1939, the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, also known as the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. This agreement, between ideological adversaries Germany and the Soviet Union, outwardly pledged neutrality. However, a secret protocol within the pact delineated spheres of influence in Eastern Europe, crucially providing for the division of Poland between the two powers. This pact effectively removed the threat of a two-front war for Germany, clearing the path for its invasion of Poland and profoundly altering the geopolitical landscape of Europe. The pre-war machinations culminated on September 1, 1939, when Germany launched its invasion of Poland. This offensive marked the beginning of World War II. Employing a new military doctrine known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, German forces overwhelmed Polish defenses with unprecedented speed and coordination. The invasion unfolded without a formal declaration of war, catching much of the world by surprise despite months of escalating threats. Historical accounts confirm that this aggressive act immediately triggered a series of diplomatic responses that would soon plunge Europe into total war. Amidst the swift German advance into Poland, a heroic but ultimately futile defense took place at Westerplatte, a Polish military transit depot on the Baltic Sea near Danzig. For 7 days, a small Polish garrison of around 200 soldiers valiantly resisted sustained German land and naval assaults. Their tenacious stand, against overwhelming odds, became a symbol of Polish resistance and determination in the face of invasion. Despite the eventual fall of Westerplatte, the defenders' courage resonated, providing a rallying point for Polish morale and demonstrating the ferocity with which the war would be fought. The invasion of Poland immediately forced the hand of Western powers. On September 3, 1939, 2 days after the German offensive began, both Great Britain and France issued ultimatums to Germany, demanding the withdrawal of its forces from Poland. When these demands were ignored, both nations declared war on Germany. This solemn declaration officially marked the beginning of World War II, transforming a regional conflict into a European, and soon global, conflagration. The declaration signaled the end of the appeasement policy and a decisive shift in international relations, confirming fears of a widespread conflict. The German Blitzkrieg doctrine proved devastatingly effective in Poland in subsequent campaigns. This strategy relied on rapid, coordinated attacks by tanks, motorized infantry, and close air support to break through enemy lines, bypass strong points, and encircle opposing forces. The goal was to achieve a quick victory, preventing the enemy from establishing a coherent defense. This revolutionary approach, documented by military historians, contrasted sharply with the static trench warfare of World War I. The effectiveness of Blitzkrieg initially gave Germany a significant tactical advantage, reshaping the landscape of modern warfare. After consolidating control over Poland, Germany turned its attention north. In April 1940, it launched invasions of Denmark and Norway. The invasion of Denmark was swift, lasting only a few hours. Norway, however, offered more determined resistance with Allied assistance, but eventually fell. The strategic objectives were crucial: to secure vital iron ore shipments from Sweden through Norwegian ports and to establish naval and air bases to counter the British blockade and facilitate U-boat operations in the Atlantic. This expansion into Scandinavia demonstrated Germany's broadening war aims beyond Eastern Europe. In May 1940, Germany initiated its Western offensive, swiftly moving through the Low Countries and bypassing the heavily fortified French Maginot Line. The speed and unexpected direction of the German advance, particularly through the Ardennes forest, caught the Allied forces off guard. Within weeks, the British Expeditionary Force and large portions of the French army were encircled near Dunkirk. Despite the heroic evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk, the German offensive continued, leading to the capitulation of France in June 1940. The rapid fall of France shocked the world and demonstrated the apparent invincibility of the Wehrmacht. The Dunkirk evacuation, codenamed Operation Dynamo, was a pivotal moment in the fall of France. From May 26 to June 4, 1940, an incredible armada of military and civilian vessels converged on the beaches of Dunkirk to rescue Allied soldiers trapped by the German advance. Despite constant air attacks and shelling, over 338,000 British, French, and other Allied troops were successfully evacuated across the English Channel. While a tactical defeat, this miracle of Dunkirk preserved a significant portion of the Allied fighting force, allowing Britain to continue the war. It remains a powerful symbol of resilience. With France fallen, Britain stood alone. Hitler's plan for an invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, hinged on achieving air superiority over the English Channel. This led to the Battle of Britain, fought primarily between the German Luftwaffe and the British Royal Air Force, RAF, from July to October 1940. German bombers targeted British airfields, radar installations, and eventually cities. The RAF, though outnumbered, utilized advanced radar technology and superior tactical deployment of its fighter aircraft, particularly the Spitfire and Hurricane, to inflict heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. This sustained aerial combat was a critical turning point. The Battle of Britain highlighted the transformative impact of technology on warfare, particularly radar. Developed independently by several nations in the 1930s, British scientists had advanced radar systems, chain home, that provided early warning of incoming German air raids. This allowed the RAF to scramble its limited fighter squadrons efficiently, conserving fuel and pilots and engaging the enemy at a tactical advantage. Without radar, the RAF would have been forced to patrol constantly, exhausting its resources. Military historians widely credit radar as a decisive factor in Britain's ability to resist the Luftwaffe's onslaught. As the war continued in Europe, Germany sought to solidify its alliances. On September 27, 1940, the Tripartite Pact was signed in Berlin by Germany, Italy, and Japan, formally establishing the Axis powers. This agreement pledged mutual military and economic assistance if any signatory were attacked by a power not already involved in the European War or the Sino-Japanese conflict. The pact aimed to deter the United States from entering the war by presenting a united front across 3 continents. This formalized alliance marked a significant escalation, clearly delineating the global battle lines. The conflict soon extended beyond Europe to North Africa. Beginning in September 1940 with an Italian invasion of Egypt, the campaign later saw significant German involvement under General Erwin Rommel, commander of the Afrika Korps. The desert warfare in North Africa was characterized by fluid movements, tank battles, and fierce competition for supply lines. Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, achieved early successes with his innovative tactics and aggressive leadership. Control of North Africa was crucial for access to Middle Eastern oil and for safeguarding the Suez Canal, a vital shipping route for the British Empire. Breaking the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, on June 22, 1941. This massive offensive involved over 3 million Axis soldiers, representing the largest land invasion in history. Hitler's objectives were multifaceted: to secure Lebensraum in the east, gain control of Soviet oil fields and agricultural lands, and annihilate Bolshevism and its perceived Jewish communist roots. The initial advance was devastatingly swift, catching the unprepared Soviet Union by surprise. This invasion opened the brutal Eastern Front, a theater that would consume the majority of German military resources. The invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, was driven by both ideological and pragmatic objectives. Ideologically, Hitler aimed to destroy Bolshevism and implement his racial theories, subjugating or eliminating Slavic populations and annihilating Soviet Jewry. Pragmatically, Germany desperately needed the vast natural resources of the Soviet Union, particularly oil from the Caucasus and the fertile agricultural lands of Ukraine, to sustain its war economy and achieve self-sufficiency. These ambitious and genocidal goals, documented in Nazi war plans, underscore the radical nature of the Eastern Front conflict, distinct from other theaters. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought from August 1942 to February 1943, stands as one of the most brutal and decisive engagements of the entire war. German forces launched an offensive to capture the city of Stalingrad, crucial for its industrial output and its strategic location on the Volga River. After months of street-to-street fighting, characterized by extreme close-quarters combat and immense casualties, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive, encircling the German Sixth Army. The subsequent surrender of over 90,000 German troops marked a catastrophic defeat for Germany and a crucial turning point on the Eastern Front, from which the Axis never fully recovered. The human cost of the Battle of Stalingrad was staggering, making it arguably the bloodiest battle in history. Estimates vary, but historical analyses suggest combined Axis and Soviet casualties, including killed, wounded, missing, and captured, exceeded 2 million. The Soviet Union alone suffered over 1.1 million casualties in and around the city. This immense loss of life highlights the scale of the Eastern Front's brutality and the resolve of the Soviet defense. The sheer number of fatalities underscores Stalingrad's immense significance, not just as a strategic victory, but as a symbol of human suffering during the conflict. Another horrific chapter on the Eastern Front was the Siege of Leningrad, one of the longest and most destructive sieges in history. German and Finnish forces encircled the city from September 1941 to January 1944, a duration of nearly 900 days. The primary goal was to starve the city into submission. Residents faced unimaginable hardships, including extreme cold, relentless shelling, and severe famine. Despite a desperate road-of-life supply route across frozen Lake Ladoga, over 1 million civilians perished from starvation, disease, and bombardment. Leningrad's resilience became a powerful symbol of Soviet defiance. While Europe was engulfed in war, tensions escalated in the Pacific. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise aerial attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet, buying Japan time to expand its empire in Southeast Asia. Though a tactical success for Japan, sinking or damaging numerous American warships and aircraft, the attack proved to be a catastrophic strategic miscalculation. The next day, December 8, the United States declared war on Japan, formally entering World War II and fundamentally altering the global balance of power. This event unified American resolve. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway in June 1942 proved to be a decisive turning point in the Pacific theater. The Imperial Japanese Navy sought to draw out and destroy the remainder of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, but American codebreakers had intercepted and decrypted Japanese plans. Leveraging this intelligence, the U.S. Navy successfully ambushed the Japanese carrier force, sinking 4 of their fleet carriers, while losing only 1 of their own. This devastating loss of naval air power crippled Japan's offensive capabilities and effectively shifted the balance of power in the Pacific, marking the end of Japanese naval dominance. Following Midway, the United States and its allies adopted an island-hopping or leapfrogging strategy in the Pacific. This involved selectively capturing strategically important islands while bypassing heavily fortified Japanese strongholds. The goal was to establish forward air bases and naval staging points closer to mainland Japan, conserving resources and shortening the path to invasion. Each island taken, such as Iwo Jima or Okinawa, involved brutal and costly amphibious assaults against deeply entrenched Japanese defenders. This methodical but effective approach eventually brought Allied forces within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. Before the full onset of global conflict, atrocities were already committed in Asia. In December 1937, during the Second Sino-Japanese War, Japanese Imperial Army forces captured the city of Nanking, now Nanjing, then the capital of China. What followed was a 6-week period of horrific violence, known as the Rape of Nanking. Japanese soldiers engaged in widespread murder, rape, looting, and arson, targeting both soldiers and civilians. Estimates of the death toll vary, but many historians place it in the hundreds of thousands. This event remains a deeply painful and contentious chapter in East Asian history, highlighting the brutality of Japanese aggression. The Holocaust represents one of the darkest chapters in human history, the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. This genocide was rooted in Hitler's virulent anti-Semitism, documented since the 1920s. Beyond Jews, millions of other victims, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, Poles, disabled people, homosexuals, and political opponents, were also targeted. Historians emphasize that the Holocaust was not an accidental byproduct of war but a deliberate, centrally planned program of extermination, executed with chilling bureaucratic efficiency, reflecting a profound moral collapse. The Nazi regime established a vast network of concentration and extermination camps across occupied Europe. Concentration camps, such as Dachau and Buchenwald, initially served to imprison political opponents and undesirables, where prisoners endured forced labor, starvation, and brutality. Extermination camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, and Sobibor, were purpose-built facilities primarily for the efficient mass murder of Jews using poison gas. Accounts from survivors and captured German documents meticulously detail the horrifying scale and methods employed within these camps, revealing an industrial approach to genocide. Within some concentration camps, particularly Auschwitz, horrific medical experiments were conducted on prisoners by Nazi doctors like Joseph Mengele. These experiments, often without anesthesia, included studies on twins, attempts to change eye color, sterilization procedures, and investigations into resistance to cold and high altitudes. These cruel and pseudoscientific research projects caused immense suffering, mutilation, and death, violating every ethical principle. The Nuremberg trials later condemned these barbaric acts as crimes against humanity, with the testimonies serving as stark evidence of the depths of Nazi depravity. The persecution of Jews in Germany began long before the camps. In 1935, the Nazi regime enacted the Nuremberg Laws, a series of anti-Semitic statutes that formalized racial discrimination. These laws stripped Jews of their German citizenship, prohibited marriage and extramarital relations between Jews and Germans, and excluded Jews from most aspects of public life. Historians view the Nuremberg Laws as a critical step in the gradual dehumanization and segregation of Jews, laying the legal groundwork for their eventual extermination. They illustrate the insidious, legislative prelude to the violence of the Holocaust. In January 1942, high-ranking Nazi officials convened the Wannsee Conference in a Berlin suburb. The purpose of this meeting, chaired by Reinhard Heydrich, was to coordinate and implement the final solution to the Jewish question, explicitly detailing the systematic extermination of Europe's Jewish population. The minutes of the conference, recovered after the war, reveal a cold, bureaucratic discussion about logistics and efficiency in carrying out mass murder across Nazi-occupied territories. Historians consider the Wannsee Conference a definitive moment in the institutionalization of the Holocaust, transforming genocidal ideology into systematic policy. Despite the overwhelming oppression, acts of Jewish resistance occurred throughout the Holocaust. One of the most significant was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which began on April 19, 1943. Facing imminent deportation to extermination camps, Jewish fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto, armed with meager weapons, launched a desperate and heroic revolt against heavily armed German forces. Though ultimately crushed after nearly a month of fierce fighting, the uprising was the largest single act of Jewish resistance during the war. It served as a powerful testament to the human spirit and defiance in the face of unimaginable terror. Among the millions of victims, the story of Anne Frank offers a poignant human perspective on the Holocaust. Hiding with her family in an Amsterdam annex for over 2 years, Anne documented her experiences and observations in a diary. Her writings provide a unique and intimate account of life under Nazi persecution, capturing the hopes, fears, and daily struggles of those in hiding. Discovered after her death in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945, The Diary of a Young Girl became one of the most widely read books in the world, offering a powerful, personal testament to the impact of the Holocaust on individual lives. As the war intensified, Allied leaders began to articulate their vision for the post-war world. In August 1941, before the U.S. officially entered the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met secretly and issued the Atlantic Charter. This joint declaration outlined principles for international cooperation, including self-determination for peoples, freedom of the seas, economic cooperation, and disarmament of aggressor nations. While not a formal treaty, the Atlantic Charter served as a foundational document for the future United Nations and articulated the moral goals for the Allied cause, contrasting sharply with Axis aims. Even before its formal entry into the war, the United States significantly aided Allied efforts through the Lend-Lease Act, passed in March 1941. This program authorized the U.S. government to lend or lease war materials, including weapons, food, and equipment, to countries deemed vital for American defense. Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, and other Allied nations received billions of dollars worth of aid, enabling them to continue fighting against the Axis powers without immediate full payment. Historians acknowledge Lend-Lease as a crucial factor in sustaining the Allied war effort, particularly for Britain and the Soviet Union, before U.S. combat involvement. Intelligence gathering and code-breaking played an indispensable role in the Allied victory. The most famous example is the deciphering of Germany's Enigma code. Polish cryptologists initially made significant breakthroughs, which were then further developed by British codebreakers at Bletchley Park. Using early computers and brilliant mathematical minds, they were able to read vast numbers of encrypted German military communications. This intelligence, known as Ultra, provided crucial insights into German U-boat movements in the Atlantic, troop deployments, and strategic intentions, saving countless lives and significantly shortening the war. The secrecy surrounding Ultra persisted for decades. Throughout German-occupied Europe, resistance movements emerged, often operating clandestinely and at great personal risk. In France, the Maquis were rural guerrilla bands of French resistance fighters. They launched sabotage operations against German infrastructure, gathered intelligence, and assisted downed Allied airmen. The Maquis played a vital role, particularly in the lead-up to D-Day, harassing German troops and disrupting communications, thereby aiding the Allied invasion. Their courage and dedication underscore the widespread opposition to Nazi occupation, demonstrating that even under totalitarian rule, acts of defiance persisted. In Yugoslavia, one of the most effective and formidable resistance movements was led by Josip Broz Tito. His communist-led partisans waged a relentless guerrilla war against the Axis occupation forces and local collaborationist regimes. Unlike many other European resistance groups, the Yugoslav partisans successfully liberated large swaths of territory and eventually, largely through their own efforts, drove out the Axis powers. This fierce struggle resulted in immense casualties but also built a unified Yugoslav identity. Tito's partisans demonstrated the potential for indigenous forces to significantly impact the outcome of the war. From 1942 onwards, the Western Allies engaged in extensive strategic bombing campaigns against Germany and, later, Japan. The British Royal Air Force primarily conducted nighttime area bombing, targeting German cities and industrial areas, aiming to dehouse workers and disrupt war production. The U.S. Army Air Forces, in contrast, focused on daytime precision bombing of specific industrial and military targets. Cities like Dresden and Hamburg suffered immense destruction and massive civilian casualties, raising complex ethical questions about the conduct of total war, questions that continue to be debated by historians to this day. The long-anticipated invasion of Western Europe, codenamed Operation Overlord, commenced on June 6, 1944, with the D-Day landings in Normandy, France. This monumental amphibious assault, involving over 150,000 Allied troops, thousands of ships, and vast air support, was the largest in history. Landing on 5 beaches Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword, the Allies aimed to establish a foothold in France and open a second front against Germany. Despite fierce German resistance, particularly on Omaha Beach, the Allied forces successfully secured their positions, marking the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. D-Day was a colossal undertaking. As Allied forces advanced through France in late 1944, Hitler launched a desperate final offensive in the Ardennes forest, known as the Battle of the Bulge. Beginning in December 1944, German forces surprised the thinly spread American lines, creating a large bulge in the Allied front. The battle was characterized by severe winter weather, intense fighting, and initial Allied setbacks. However, determined American resistance, particularly at Bastogne, and the eventual arrival of air support and reinforcements, ultimately halted the German advance. This costly battle exhausted Germany's remaining reserves of men and material, effectively sealing its fate on the Western Front. While the Western Allies pushed from the west, the Soviet Red Army relentlessly advanced from the east, ultimately reaching the gates of Berlin. The Battle of Berlin, fought from April to May 1945, was the final major offensive of the European theater. Over 2.5 million Soviet soldiers engaged the remaining German forces, including regular army units, Waffen-SS, and hastily conscripted Volkssturm militias, in fierce urban combat. The fighting was house-to-house, immensely destructive, and incredibly costly. The capture of the Reichstag building became a symbolic moment of victory for the Soviet Union, signaling the imminent end of the Nazi regime. As Soviet troops fought their way into the heart of Berlin, Adolf Hitler retreated to his underground bunker, the Führer bunker. On April 30, 1945, with the Red Army just blocks away, Hitler committed suicide, shooting himself in the head. His wife, Eva Braun, whom he had married just hours earlier, died by cyanide poisoning. According to historical accounts from his staff, Their bodies were then carried into the Chancellery Garden, doused in petrol, and set alight. Hitler's death marked the definitive end of the Nazi regime and removed the central figurehead of the Axis powers, ushering in the final days of the war in Europe. Following Hitler's death, remnants of the German command sought to surrender. On May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered unconditionally to the Allied powers, bringing an end to the war in Europe. This day became known as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day, and was met with widespread celebrations across Allied nations. While fighting continued in the Pacific, VE Day marked the conclusion of 6 years of devastating conflict on the European continent, signifying the triumph over Nazi tyranny and the liberation of millions from oppression. The cheers and relief of that day underscored the immense suffering that had preceded it. While Europe celebrated, the war in the Pacific raged on. To force Japan's unconditional surrender and avoid a potentially catastrophic land invasion, the United States decided to deploy a new, devastating weapon. On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb Little Boy was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The blast instantly killed tens of thousands and leveled much of the city, ushering in the nuclear age. The immense destructive power and the long-term effects of radiation were unprecedented, shocking the world and forever changing the nature of warfare. This decision remains a subject of intense historical debate. Despite the devastation at Hiroshima, the Japanese government did not immediately surrender. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. This attack, too, caused widespread destruction and tens of thousands of casualties. The twin shocks of the atomic bombs, coupled with the Soviet Union's declaration of war and invasion of Manchuria on the same day, finally compelled Japan to accept the terms of surrender. The deployment of these weapons brought a swift, brutal end to the Pacific War, but at an immense human cost, leaving an enduring legacy of fear and controversy. Following the atomic bombings and the Soviet entry into the war against Japan, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender to the Allies on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. This day, known as Victory over Japan Day, or VJ Day, officially marked the end of World War II. After 6 years and 1 day of global conflict, the deadliest war in human history finally concluded, bringing relief and celebration to Allied nations, and the daunting task of rebuilding a shattered world. The era of global conflict had closed, but a new one, the Cold War, was already beginning. In the aftermath of the war, the Allied powers established the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, Germany, to prosecute major Nazi war criminals. From 1945 to 1946, prominent Nazi officials, including Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, faced charges of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The trials established critical precedents in international law, holding individuals accountable for their actions during wartime, regardless of their position. While controversial at the time for being victor's justice, the Nuremberg trials laid the groundwork for modern international criminal law and humanitarian principles. They sought to document and judge the atrocities committed. To aid in Europe's recovery and prevent the spread of communism, the United States launched the European Recovery Program, famously known as the Marshall Plan, in 1948. This ambitious initiative provided over $13 billion in economic aid to help rebuild war-torn Western European economies. The plan aimed to stabilize political conditions, restore infrastructure, and foster economic growth, thereby countering Soviet influence. Historians largely credit the Marshall Plan with revitalizing Western European economies, promoting democratic stability, and laying the foundation for post-war prosperity, profoundly shaping the geopolitical alignment of the Cold War era. Driven by the desire to prevent future global conflicts, the United Nations was officially established on October 24, 1945, building upon the principles outlined in the Atlantic Charter. Its primary goals were to maintain international peace and security, foster friendly relations among nations, and promote social progress, better living standards, and human rights. Replacing the largely ineffective League of Nations, the UN brought together representatives from diverse nations to engage in diplomacy and collective problem-solving. It remains a crucial international organization, striving to uphold peace and facilitate cooperation in a complex world. The end of World War II did not usher in an era of universal peace, but rather laid the groundwork for a new global rivalry, the Cold War. The ideological differences between the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union, intensified rapidly. Disagreements over the post-war governance of Germany and Eastern Europe, the division of spheres of influence, and the development of nuclear weapons fueled a period of geopolitical tension, proxy conflicts, and an arms race that lasted for decades. Historians mark the immediate post-war period as the true genesis of this new era of global confrontation. World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history. The scale of military casualties was unprecedented. The Soviet Union suffered the most, with an estimated 8.7 to 11.4 million military deaths. Germany sustained approximately 5.5 million military deaths, while China recorded around 3 million. Other major powers also endured staggering losses, including Japan with 2.1 million, and the British Empire and the United States with roughly 450,000 and 400,000 military deaths, respectively. These figures, compiled by demographic historians, reflect the immense human cost borne by soldiers and sailors across all fronts, in every theater of the war. Beyond military losses, World War II inflicted catastrophic civilian casualties, often surpassing military deaths in many nations. China, for instance, suffered an estimated 10 to 20 million civilian deaths, primarily due to famine, disease, and Japanese atrocities. The Soviet Union also experienced enormous civilian losses, estimated between 13 to 17 million, from starvation, massacres, and the Holocaust. European civilian deaths, including those from strategic bombing and the Holocaust, contributed significantly to the overall toll. These statistics underscore the total war nature of the conflict, where entire populations became targets, blurring the lines between combatants and non-combatants. When combining military and civilian figures, the total death toll of World War II is estimated to be between 70 to 85 million people, making it by far the deadliest conflict in human history. This staggering number represents approximately 3% of the world's population at the time. The vast majority of these deaths occurred in Eurasia, particularly in Eastern Europe and East Asia. The war's demographic impact was profound, with entire generations lost and societies fundamentally altered. The scale of this loss continues to inform global efforts for peace and reconciliation, serving as a constant reminder of the horrific consequences of unchecked aggression and ideological extremism. Poland, as the first nation invaded by Germany and later by the Soviet Union, suffered immensely during World War II. Its strategic location and the Nazi racial policies targeting Slavic populations led to catastrophic losses. Approximately 6 million Polish citizens, nearly 20% of its pre-war population, perished, including 3 million Polish Jews. Its infrastructure was systematically destroyed, its cultural heritage looted, and its borders redrawn. Historians often refer to Poland's experience as one of the most brutal of the war, a nation caught between two totalitarian powers, bearing witness to unimaginable horrors and systematic attempts to erase its identity. World War II spurred unprecedented technological innovation, fundamentally altering subsequent human history. Key advancements included the development of radar, jet engines, rocketry, and the first electronic computers, driven by urgent wartime demands. Medical science also saw rapid progress, particularly in treatments for trauma and infectious diseases like penicillin. While many of these innovations had destructive origins, they laid the foundation for post-war technological revolutions, influencing everything from space travel to computing and civilian air travel. The war became a crucible for scientific and engineering ingenuity, albeit often with deadly applications. World War II significantly altered traditional gender roles, as millions of women around the world stepped into new roles to support the war effort. In factories, they took on jobs previously reserved for men, producing munitions, aircraft, and other vital war materials. Women also served in various auxiliary military roles, as nurses, pilots, codebreakers, and truck drivers, often freeing up men for combat duties. Their contributions were crucial to maintaining industrial output and supporting logistics. This widespread participation challenged societal norms and paved the way for greater female empowerment and changes in post-war labor markets, underscoring their vital role. Children were among the most vulnerable victims of World War II, facing displacement, starvation, persecution, and the trauma of war. Millions were orphaned or separated from their families. In cities under siege or occupation, children endured relentless bombing, food shortages, and the constant threat of violence. Many became child soldiers or participated in resistance movements. The psychological and physical scars of this generation were profound, shaping post-war society. The narratives of child survivors, like in Frank, illuminate the devastating impact of conflict on innocence, reminding us of the human cost beyond statistics. Propaganda and censorship were critical tools wielded by all belligerent nations during World War II. Governments used posters, radio broadcasts, films, and leaflets to rally public support, demonize the enemy, and maintain morale. Censorship, conversely, aimed to control information, suppress dissent, and prevent strategic intelligence from reaching the enemy. While effective in shaping public opinion and mobilizing populations, these practices also highlighted the manipulative aspects of state power during total war. The battle for hearts and minds was as crucial as the battle on the front lines, with nations seeking to control both narratives and facts. On the home front, civilians in many nations experienced extensive rationing of food, fuel, clothing, and other essential goods. Governments implemented these measures to ensure equitable distribution of scarce resources and prioritize supplies for the military. Citizens were encouraged to grow victory gardens and conserve resources. This collective effort fostered a sense of national unity and shared sacrifice. While often challenging, rationing played a crucial role in sustaining the war economy and demonstrating the resilience of civilian populations. It reshaped daily life, requiring ingenuity and cooperation from ordinary people to contribute to the war effort. Across occupied Europe, populations faced a stark choice between resistance and collaboration. Resistance movements, like the French Maquis or Yugoslav partisans, actively sabotaged Axis operations, gathered intelligence, and protected persecuted minorities, often at immense personal risk. Conversely, collaborationist governments and individuals assisted the occupying powers, sometimes driven by ideology, fear, or self-interest. This complex dynamic fractured societies, creating deep divisions that often lingered for decades after the war. The spectrum of responses highlights the difficult moral choices imposed by occupation and the varied human reactions to extreme pressure. In February 1945, with victory in sight, the Big Three Allied leaders, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, met at Yalta in Crimea. They discussed the post-war reorganization of Europe, the re-establishment of nations, and the prosecution of war criminals. Key agreements included the division of Germany into occupation zones, the status of Eastern European nations, and the entry of the Soviet Union into the war against Japan. However, tensions over Poland and future spheres of influence foreshadowed the coming Cold War, setting the stage for decades of geopolitical rivalry despite the outward show of Allied unity. Following Germany's surrender, the Big Three met again at Potsdam, Germany, in July-August 1945. This time, Harry S. Truman represented the United States, and Clement Attlee replaced Winston Churchill mid-conference. The conference aimed to finalize agreements on the administration of occupied Germany, the prosecution of war criminals, and the peace treaties. Crucially, Truman also informed Stalin about the successful testing of the atomic bomb, a development that would profoundly impact post-war relations. Despite formal agreements, the Potsdam Conference revealed growing cracks in the Grand Alliance, intensifying mutual suspicion and laying further groundwork for the Cold War. World War II profoundly impacted global colonialism. The war weakened the European colonial powers, Britain, France, and the Netherlands, both economically and militarily. Their inability to defend their overseas empires against Japanese expansion, particularly in Southeast Asia, exposed their vulnerabilities and fueled nationalist movements. Returning colonial subjects, who had fought for the Allies, demanded self-determination and independence. This shift in power dynamics accelerated decolonization movements across Asia and Africa in the post-war decades, fundamentally reshaping the global political map and leading to the birth of numerous independent nations, transforming the world order. One of the most significant geopolitical outcomes of World War II was the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as the world's two dominant superpowers. The war had largely devastated traditional European powers, leaving a vacuum of influence. The United States, with its unparalleled industrial capacity and newfound nuclear monopoly, and the Soviet Union, with its massive land army and ideological reach, found themselves as opposing poles in a bipolar world order. This dual emergence set the stage for the Cold War, a decades-long standoff that defined international relations until the collapse of the Soviet Union. The global balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The economic aftermath of World War II was diverse and profound. Europe and parts of Asia faced widespread destruction of infrastructure, industries, and agricultural capacity. Millions were displaced, and economies were in tatters. In contrast, the United States, having avoided direct combat on its mainland, emerged with its industrial base intact and vastly expanded, becoming the world's leading economic power. This disparity led to initiatives like the Marshall Plan, but also contributed to global economic realignments. The war fundamentally reshaped global trade, finance, and industrial production, laying foundations for new economic blocs and development patterns. The legacy of the Holocaust continues to deeply impact global consciousness. Memorials, museums, and educational programs worldwide strive to ensure that its lessons are never forgotten. Survivor testimonies, historical documents, and academic research provide an ongoing effort to understand the mechanisms of genocide and its human cost. The phrase "never again" has become a rallying cry for human rights and genocide prevention. The Holocaust serves as a permanent moral marker, prompting continuous reflection on the dangers of anti-Semitism, hatred, and unchecked state power, shaping contemporary debates about human rights and historical accountability. Beyond Nuremberg, numerous other war crimes trials were conducted in the aftermath of World War II, both by international tribunals and national courts. These included trials for Japanese war criminals in Tokyo, and countless proceedings against lower-ranking officials and collaborators across Europe and Asia. The pursuit of justice, though often imperfect and controversial, aimed to bring perpetrators to account and provide a measure of retribution for victims. This foundational period of international criminal justice shaped future efforts to prosecute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, influencing institutions like the International Criminal Court. The division of Europe into ideological blocs was famously described by Winston Churchill in 1946 as an iron curtain descending across the continent. This metaphorical barrier physically and ideologically separated Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe from the capitalist West. It involved heavily fortified borders, severe travel restrictions, and a complete lack of free communication and trade between the two blocs. The Iron Curtain symbolized the nascent Cold War, representing the profound division that shaped international relations for over 4 decades, dictating political alliances, economic systems, and cultural exchanges until its eventual dismantling. The Cold War solidified into formal military alliances. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed, uniting the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations in a collective defense pact against potential Soviet aggression. In response, the Soviet Union and its satellite states in Eastern Europe established the Warsaw Pact in 1955. These two opposing military blocs symbolized the entrenched ideological and geopolitical division of the world. They maintained large standing armies and engaged in a continuous arms race, particularly nuclear, defining the balance of power and the ever-present threat of a new global conflict. The deployment of atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki ushered in the atomic age, forever changing warfare and international relations. The immediate post-war period saw a rapid nuclear arms race as the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb in 1949, ending the U.S. monopoly. This proliferation led to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, where the use of nuclear weapons by one superpower would inevitably lead to its own destruction. The constant threat of nuclear annihilation cast a long shadow over the Cold War, compelling nations to develop intricate strategies for deterrence and arms control, fundamentally altering diplomacy and military strategy. Beyond the immense destruction, World War II also left a legacy of immense courage and sacrifice. Millions of individuals, from soldiers on distant battlefields to resistance fighters in occupied territories and civilians enduring hardship on the home front, demonstrated extraordinary bravery. Their collective efforts, resilience, and willingness to stand against tyranny ultimately secured victory against the Axis powers. This legacy serves as a powerful reminder of the human capacity for heroism and selflessness in the face of overwhelming adversity. The stories of these individuals continue to inspire and resonate, shaping our understanding of moral duty and commitment. One of the most enduring lessons drawn from the pre-war period of World War II is the danger of appeasement. The Munich Agreement of 1938, where Britain and France conceded the Sudetenland to Hitler in hopes of avoiding war, demonstrably failed to curb Nazi aggression. Instead, it emboldened Hitler, leading to further demands and eventually full-scale conflict. Historians frequently cite this experience as evidence that unchecked aggression must be confronted early and decisively. The memory of appeasement has profoundly influenced post-war foreign policy, shaping responses to international crises and interventions for decades to come, becoming a cautionary tale for diplomats. The sheer scale of human suffering, death, and material destruction inflicted by World War II serves as a profound testament to the catastrophic cost of global conflict. Beyond the immediate casualties, the war disrupted societies, displaced millions, and left an enduring psychological impact on generations. The economic toll was immense, requiring decades of reconstruction. The lessons learned from this unprecedented devastation continue to inform international diplomacy, peace efforts, and humanitarian aid. It underscores the vital importance of resolving disputes through peaceful means and rejecting ideologies that promote hatred and violence, forever etched into collective memory. The Holocaust and the plight of Jewish survivors significantly impacted the post-war debate over the establishment of a Jewish homeland. The global shock and moral outrage at the genocide intensified international support for Zionism. In 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a plan to partition mandatory Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. This led to the declaration of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, creating a new geopolitical reality in the Middle East. While rooted in historical claims, its formation was directly accelerated by the tragic events of World War II and the urgent need for a safe haven for Jewish people. Beyond Europe, World War II profoundly reshaped Asia. Japan's imperial ambitions led to brutal occupation across China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. The war weakened European colonial powers, directly contributing to post-war independence movements in India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and elsewhere. The defeat of Japan also paved the way for the Chinese Communist Party's victory in the Civil War. The post-war restructuring of Asia saw the emergence of new independent nations and regional powers, often grappling with the scars of war and the pressures of the nascent Cold War. The entire geopolitical landscape of the continent was irrevocably altered by the conflict. Even decades after its conclusion, the enduring scars of World War II remain visible in landscapes, societies, and collective memories across the globe. Unexploded ordnance still surfaces, architectural ruins stand as grim reminders, and the descendants of survivors and victims carry intergenerational trauma. The geopolitical structures, international laws, and human rights frameworks forged in its wake continue to define the modern world. The Second World War was not merely a historical event, it was a cataclysmic turning point that permanently reshaped human civilization, forcing a reckoning with both the darkest aspects of humanity and its remarkable capacity for resilience. The leaders and thinkers who emerged from the ashes of World War II became the architects of the modern world. Figures like Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin navigated the immediate post-war challenges, but also figures like George Marshall, who conceived the European Recovery Program, and the drafters of the UN Charter, shaped the new global order. Their decisions, both collaborative and contentious, laid the foundations for the international institutions, economic systems, and diplomatic frameworks that define our contemporary reality. Understanding their complex motivations and actions is key to comprehending the geopolitical landscape of today. The cultural impact of World War II was profound and far-reaching, influencing art, literature, cinema, and music for decades. The war inspired countless narratives of heroism and sacrifice, but also explored themes of trauma, loss, and the moral ambiguities of conflict. Films like Casablanca captured wartime romance, while The Best Years of Our Lives depicted the struggles of returning veterans. Artists depicted the destruction, and writers grappled with philosophical questions of good and evil. The cultural memory of the war continues to be explored and reinterpreted, reflecting its enduring hold on the human imagination and its persistent relevance. World War II created an unprecedented refugee crisis, displacing tens of millions of people across Europe and Asia. Ethnic Germans were expelled from Eastern Europe, Jews sought new homes after the Holocaust, and countless others fled war zones or were forcibly relocated. These displaced persons faced immense challenges in finding shelter, food, and new lives. International organizations, notably the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration (UNRRA), were established to manage this humanitarian catastrophe. The crisis highlighted the devastating human cost of war and laid the groundwork for modern international refugee law and aid systems, a legacy that continues to shape global responses. World War II irrevocably changed the nature of warfare. The conflict saw the full industrialization of war, with mass production of advanced weapons, total mobilization of economies, and strategic bombing blurring the lines between military and civilian targets. The introduction of nuclear weapons ushered in an era where global annihilation became a possibility, compelling new strategies of deterrence. Beyond technology, the war demonstrated the ideological intensity of modern conflict, fought not just for territory but for competing worldviews. The lessons of this shift continue to inform military doctrine and international security discussions to this day. In the final days of the war, as Germany faced inevitable defeat, Hitler's internal narratives shifted to finding scapegoats. He blamed various groups for Germany's failures, including his own generals, the German people themselves for not being strong enough, and, consistently, the Jewish people and Bolsheviks for a perceived global conspiracy. This deflection of responsibility was characteristic of his leadership. Historians analyzing his last directives and statements from the bunker confirm this persistent pattern of blaming others for the catastrophic consequences of his own policies, refusing to acknowledge the profound errors and moral failures of the Nazi regime. The long-term geopolitical shifts initiated by World War II are still evident today. The bipolar world of the Cold War eventually transitioned into a multipolar one, but the foundational structures laid in 1945, like the United Nations, endure. The rise of new independent nations from former colonies, the establishment of NATO, and the economic integration of Europe all trace their origins directly to the war's aftermath. These enduring changes demonstrate that World War II was not just an event, but a profound reordering of global power, alliances, and principles that continues to shape international relations in the 21st century, a truly epoch-defining conflict. Beyond human and economic costs, World War II also left a significant environmental impact. Extensive bombing campaigns, scorched earth tactics, and chemical warfare devastated landscapes, poisoned soil and water, and destroyed vast forests. The construction of military infrastructure, from airfields to fortifications, altered natural habitats. While environmental concerns were not a priority during the conflict, the scale of wartime destruction undoubtedly contributed to long-term ecological damage in many regions. Research indicates that some areas still bear the physical and chemical scars of the conflict, a silent testament to the broad reach of total war's destructive power. Amidst the grand narratives of leaders and armies, countless unsung heroes played vital roles in World War II. These were the ordinary citizens who risked their lives to save others, the resistance members who performed quiet acts of sabotage, the intelligence operatives working in the shadows, and the humanitarian workers striving to alleviate suffering. Their stories, often discovered much later, reveal the profound moral courage and compassion that persisted even in the darkest times. While their names may not fill history books, their collective actions were indispensable to the Allied victory and remain an enduring inspiration, demonstrating the power of individual agency. The memory of World War II, and the immense sacrifice it entailed, is preserved through countless memorials, historical sites, and educational initiatives worldwide. From solemn cemeteries that span continents to museums housing artifacts of suffering and resilience, these efforts ensure that future generations understand the profound impact of this conflict. Remembering is not merely an act of reverence, but a crucial commitment to learning from history, to fostering peace, and to standing against the forces of hatred and intolerance. The war's legacy compels us to reflect on humanity's capacity for both cruelty and extraordinary kindness, urging vigilance. The shadow of World War II continues to inform global efforts in conflict prevention. The establishment of international law, humanitarian conventions, and institutions like the United Nations Security Council are direct responses to the atrocities and unchecked aggression witnessed. Debates around intervention, sovereignty, and responsibility to protect nations are rooted in the failure to prevent the war and the Holocaust. While perfect peace remains elusive, the lessons from World War II underscore a collective global responsibility to work towards diplomacy, human rights, and the peaceful resolution of disputes, striving to prevent such a catastrophic conflict from ever recurring. Ultimately, World War II, for all its unparalleled destruction and human depravity, also stands as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. The will to survive, to resist, to rebuild, and to remember is a powerful narrative woven throughout the war's history. From the resilience of besieged cities to the compassion shown by rescuers and the determination of those who rebuilt their lives and nations, humanity persevered. This complex tapestry of immense suffering and profound courage serves as a reminder that even in the face of history's greatest darkness, the light of human dignity and hope can persist and ultimately triumph.